Oh, I was just filled with a moment of deep dread at the thought of talking to this camera for the next hour of my life. Hello, I'm Laurel Ann. Welcome to my August wrap-up. If you watched my last wrap-up, you know that July was a little bit slumpy for me. And I was so desperate to get out of that slump that I was just like trying all kinds of different things that would get me like excited about reading again. So what you find in this wrap-up may surprise you, because I read some genres that aren't really in my oeuvre, so to speak. So let's just get started with that. I don't know what this cat is planning to do, but he's the real star of this channel anyway, so I guess it doesn't matter. So the first book I finished in August was The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. This is about 15-year-old Xiomara, who is growing up in Harlem in a devout Catholic family. And of course, that comes with some very specific and kind of demanding expectations. Sorry, I just heard a noise. Anyway, as a girl in this family, she is expected to be good and be quiet and pray and not talk to boys. She loves reading and writing poetry, and the book is actually her journal that she writes in verse. Early on in the year, her English teacher notices that she is talented and has an interest for this thing, so she really encourages her to join the poetry club. But she knows that her mom won't let her because the poetry club meets on the same night as her confirmation classes. And meanwhile, she is talking to a really nice boy. This is such a popular book, which is why I was pretty surprised by how long it took me to get into it. I was, I think, like over halfway, and I was still kind of considering DNFing. I think that was just because the first half of the book was pretty heavily devoted to the boys' stuff, and while it was very sweet, I just don't tend to be all that interested in romance plot lines in YA, to be honest. Like, I don't know, I don't really care that much if the teens kiss. I guess I'm just old and curmudgeonly. But once it moved away from that, I got invested pretty quickly. This is a really nice and kind of quiet coming-of-age story. Like, Xiomara and her twin brother, they don't have to go on an adventure or catch a terminal illness or change the world in order to figure out what they want and how they can stick up for themselves in order to get what they want. It's kind of slice of life, really, and I really enjoyed that. I feel like I haven't read that many YA books that are like that. I do think if I'd read this when I was younger, I would have been a lot more into it a lot sooner. And I also think that had I listened to this on audiobook, my experience would have been different, because it's all about spoken word poetry and it's written kind of with that in mind. And so to hear it out loud, I think by the author, I think she narrates it, I do think that would have improved my reading experience. But overall, it was very nice and sweet, and I understand why this is so popular. Next I read I Was Born for This by Alice Oseman. See what I mean? I read 2 YA books. I don't even know who I am anymore. I know, you can't see the cat in my lap the way I frame my videos, so I'm just like slowly petting something just out of frame. Yikes. This is about Angel, an 18-year-old girl from the Midlands, I think, who travels to London to spend a week with a longtime Tumblr friend. And it's the first time that they are meeting IRL because they have tickets to go see a concert by a boy band, kind of One Direction-esque. And the boy band is the reason that they followed each other on Tumblr and made friends several years before. Then in a second point of view, we have Jimmy, who is kind of the main singer in the band. We drop in on Jimmy and the lads kind of right as their friendship and their career is at kind of a major crossroads. On the one hand, this book is kind of a love letter to fandom and everything it can do for people who are in them, and especially young people. But at the same time, it's very honest about how fandom can go too far and kind of the isolating nature of fame. I thought it dealt pretty well with mental health. Jimmy has anxiety and has panic attacks. It's also about learning to be a better friend and a better listener and becoming more empathetic. And there are some pretty dramatic and major things that happen in this book, but there's also a lot that's just very like soft and nice. Like both of these characters have supportive adults in their family. Jimmy is trans and Angel is a hijabi Muslim girl, but neither of those things like dominate their character. It's not like about being trans. It's just something that is part of this character, you know, like humans. And there's also no romance, which, you know, was a boon for ya girl. I don't know how memorable this book is. Like, when I was looking at Goodreads to, like, in preparation for this video, to, like, look at what I read, I was honestly surprised to see this in my, like, read books. I really had forgotten that I read it. If you'd asked me to list the books I read in August, I would 100% have forgotten it off the top of my head. Although, to be fair, August was an extremely long month. Ultimately, a nice and warm reading experience that also packed a few, like, soft punches. Also, how did nobody tell me that Alice Oseman is 25? Like, excuse me? I'm fine.
You just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
Next we have The Family Upstairs by Lisa Jewell. This is a thriller about a young woman who is adopted, and on her 25th birthday she finds out that she has inherited a London mansion from her birth family. It's only then that she learns that when she was an infant she was found abandoned in that house after an anonymous tip to the police. So obviously, like, she's got this multi-million-pound mansion in London. She goes there, it's spooky, and she teams up with a journalist to try and figure out, like, what happened in this house. Why was she abandoned? Why has the house sat vacant all these years? Why did no one else in the family claim it? Her story is interspersed with chapters of some man looking back on his childhood in the house. So, story time. I went on a road trip earlier in August with my sister and a friend. I thought that that would be a good shout for an audiobook to listen to on the trip. Now, usually when I listen to audiobooks while driving long distances, I can only really stand to listen to like a few chapters at once or for a few hours at once. But all three of us, when we were listening to this book, we listened to it all the way straight through. We were so into it. It was written so well. And you know that one of my issues with thrillers is that they're often not written so well. The plot kept me guessing without being like too outlandish. There was a nice unreliable narrator bent to it, which I love me an unreliable narrator. And then we liked it so much that we listened to another Lisa Jewell book on the way back. So that was Then She Was Gone, also by Lisa Jewell, obviously. So this is about Laurel, whose daughter Ellie goes missing, and then 10 years later, her remains are finally found. And in that time, Laurel and her husband have split up, and her relationship with her other two children has become pretty strained and a bit stiff. Then one day, a few weeks or months after Ellie's funeral, Laurel meets a man named Floyd in a coffee shop, and they start dating. And on their second or third date, she goes back to his house and meets his 9-year-old daughter, who is the spit of Ellie. And over the next few months, she kind of slowly pieces together what the hell has happened here. This was also good, but not quite as good as the other one. One thing that stood out to me about The Family Upstairs was that there are a lot of children in it, and they were all written well. Like, they were believable as children, but they also were, like, fully developed characters. Whereas the child character in this one is precocious to the point of being creepy. I feel like this is something that comes up in books a lot. I guess a lot of writers maybe don't have a lot of experience with children. It's even worse in like movies, particularly comedy movies. They're always just like, oh, I want children in my book or movie. But I want them as just like the idea of children. I don't actually want to have to deal with thinking about what children are like. Anyway, that was a definite flaw in this. There were also some things that happened in the conclusion of the book that I sort of took issue with. But Lisa Jewell's writing was still like very proficient. And there was the interesting element of Laurel's relationship with her children and the way that developed and the way her character grew. Both of those things were done very well, and it was a really interesting aspect of the book. Lisa Jewell is definitely a new favorite thriller writer for me. So congratulations, Lisa Jewell. Next was The Shelf by Helly Acton, a book which you've almost certainly never heard of. I picked this up on a whim because my current like work in progress writing project is a rom-com. I don't read a lot of rom-coms, and I was like, if I'm gonna write a rom-com, I should probably read more, figure out how the genre works. I didn't think these things through very much. Anyway, so I thought this was a rom-com. It's not. So this is about Amy, who is 32, and she's feeling very, very anxious about being in her 30s. And her boyfriend is taking her on holiday to a surprise destination, and she thinks that he's going to propose. But instead, he takes her to a TV studio where he dumps her on a reality TV show. So pretty outrageous start, and to be honest, I was living for it. And then the rest of the book is just Amy living in this reality TV show house, and her and the rest of the 5 women just kind of learning that men ain't shit. So this is kind of a weird one. I was very excited at first to read a book that was set on a reality TV show. I've always said, why aren't there more books set in reality TV shows? Because I love reality TV. And it's very clear that Helly Acton also loves reality TV. But I think, like, after reading this book, I understand now why books aren't really written this way. I think all of the things that make reality shows enjoyable to watch make them bad books. So I can't really explain what I mean by that. I also just kept trying to imagine this fictional show and how it would actually function on TV. And the truth is, it just wouldn't. Like, it's pretty clear that Helly Acton has never worked in television. Not that I have either, but it wouldn't work as a show. I can't really explain why without going too much into it, but it would not work as a show. The other thing is that the premise of this show, The Shelf, is to take these women who, they're all dumped at the start by their partners, and the idea is to make them into the perfect woman by, like, you know, teaching them how to cook well and teaching them not to defend themselves when they're being gaslit or disrespected. And that's not the point of the book. Like, the point of the book is that these women think that this is dumb. But in 2020, like, TV executives are not stupid enough to think that a show that sexist would be successful post-Me Too. Like, I just don't believe it. And books don't have to be believable in order to be enjoyable, but these things just really kept taking me out of the story. And yeah, like, the characters and the plot just weren't really enough to make up for that. So, you know, I didn't hate it. It's written fine. It's a debut. I'm sure she's gonna do better on her next try. But it just really wasn't what I wanted out of it. Although if you're looking for a dose of girl power feminism, look no further. Okay, and the final book that we're gonna talk about today is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. So this is a book that I've kind of had on the back burner for years as one that I was pretty sure I was going to love because I already read The Goldfinch and I loved it, and just from knowing the premise of this book, ticks a lot of boxes for me. But I was saving it for a rainy day, and that rainy day arrived, and I read it, and I adored it. If you're on BookTube in any kind of way, I'm sure you know the basics. This is about our narrator, Richard, who transfers from a community college in California to a very tiny and exclusive liberal arts college in Vermont. And against all odds, he is accepted into the classics program, which previously only allowed 5 students. In order to be in the classics department, you kind of have to totally isolate yourself from the rest of the school. He has to transfer out of all the rest of his classes and only study these subjects with one single professor. So the 5 students who are there already, they very clearly have an extremely intense relationship, and it takes him a while of kind of circling the group to finally be let into the inner sanctum. Also, we know from the very first sentence that they have murdered one of their friends. The first half of the book is kind of the lead up to the murder, and the second half is the aftermath. Now, I understand why some people don't really get on with this book. It is pretty pretentious. The characters they're pretentious. What more can I say? Pedantic and erudite. Everything that we love in our friends, right? But I love Donna Tartt's writing. I already read and loved The Goldfinch, and she's just really good. I love it. And also, unlikable characters are something that I actually like in books. In fact, I think I even prefer it. So I don't know why I failed to mention that, but anyway, carry on. There's also a lot of really weird and dark, unsettling stuff in this. A lot of mystery around these characters that isn't really the center of the book. It's just sort of flavor in this really darkly cozy world. This is definitely going to be in my favorite books of the year. I loved so many things about it. I really don't have a bad thing to say about this book. So, yay. Actually, I do have one bad thing to say, which is that this particular edition I have is very, tall. I don't know why it's like this. It's weird. I should have bought it when I lived in the UK because that cover is just nicer. But I didn't, so here we are. Now I'm stuck with this weird one. Okay, that is the end of the books. Let me know what was your favorite book that you read in August, and let's just get to chatting, shall we? God, no matter how long I do this, I will never be able to end a video without being so awkward with myself. Ugh, get a grip. Okay, that's all. Thanks, bye. It's all about spoken word poetry. It's all about spoken word. So why can't I say word?